Let me jump right in. A theme of the conference has been essentially wither the rules-based order. Who's in charge? How do we solve the cyber problem? And there's been a lot of pessimism about the role of treaties, the speed with which policy is developing. In an uncertain world where the rules-based order is under challenge, as one of the foremost thinkers in the United States about Homeland Security, having served as the president's top advisor on cyber along with other issues, and in your current role overseeing the FBI, the Justice Department, and prosecutors, how do you think about it?
Well, thanks so much, John, and thanks so much for having me here at the Cybersecurity Forum here in Munich. Well, look, I think all of the work that we are doing and that conferences like this advance when it comes to policy issues and multilateral approaches is absolutely vital. But I also think that we can't wait. We can't wait for that process to move and advance before we certainly at the Justice Department, from a law enforcement and national security perspective, before we act, which is why when I came into this job nearly 2 years ago, I took a kind of wholesale look at what we were doing in the Justice Department, conducted a comprehensive cyber review, which you know, John, because you led that review. And what I determined was we were at a pivot point. And we needed to change our orientation, and we did that, and we have been doing that, and we've been acting on it for the last 2 years. And what we have done is change our orientation to one where we're putting prevention first, disruption first, and we are putting victims at the center of our approach. So what do I mean by that? I mean we are now on our front foot and taking action using an all-tools approach, a page we have taken from the book that we use to, as all of you know, because since it has required multilateral and international partnerships to beat back the terrorism threat and to address the terrorism threat, and we're taking a similar all-tools approach to the cyber threat. So that means we are trying to break the business model when it comes to ransomware actors. And you see that in the work we did in clawing back ransomware payments in the Colonial Pipeline attack. You see that in the work that we did with, very importantly, international partners to hack the hackers when we took down the Hive ransomware network just a few weeks ago and laid in wait in the network, swiped decryptor keys, and gave them back to the victims so they could protect themselves. And we are still doing the old-fashioned work of, and very important work of working with our partners to arrest bad actors, and you see that in the work that we've done to arrest the Sodinokibi actors, key actors when it comes to TrickBot and Lockbit, and I could go on and on. But the point here is we're on our front foot and not waiting to take action, but importantly, putting victims at the center.
And in order to do that innovative approach of putting victims at the center, you need information, you need intelligence, and you need information intelligence as the foremost law enforcement action that you can lawfully act on. How do you balance that against some of the restrictions on sharing information that are done with good intentions in the name of privacy? What type of new statutes, actions, policies do you need to keep getting that information?
So you've hit upon it, John. It is vitally important, our ability to rapidly share information with our partners consistent with legal frameworks and protections that apply. But I'm glad you raised this, and obviously this audience knows all too well the very complicated environment we all find ourselves in when it comes to information sharing on this and a host of other issues. And so what we're doing is trying to put in place new mechanisms that continue to have legal controls and a framework that we can all operate under as a global set of leaders and people coming in good faith to address these issues. And I'll take a case in point. Many of you know, I'm sure, are familiar with the Cloud Act that passed a few years ago in the United States. We in the United States have entered into a data access sharing agreement with the UK under the Cloud Act. But this is complicated because what we're seeing is it's being misrepresented and misperceived. And I think there's a lot of misperception misperceptions about what it is and what it isn't out there. And so I want to take the opportunity to clear some of that up, because this is a very important audience to do so. First, there is a misperception that the Cloud Act and this agreement that we entered into with the UK, and that we hope to do a similar agreement with other countries in the EU, there's a misperception that it gives the United States some new authority. It does not. It makes explicit a widely accepted principle that a nation can provide legal process to a provider, if that provider comes within that nation's jurisdiction, to compel production of information, again, under legal process, no matter where that information is held. And I say this is a widely accepted principle because it is enshrined in the Budapest Convention that has been in effect for over 20 years, I believe, and is signed up to I think, 26 of 27 EU member states. And I say it's a widely accepted principle because it will be enshrined in the forthcoming e-evidence regulation that the EU is promulgating. So I think it's exceptionally important that we be very clear about the framework we're operating under. And also, the final point on this is this type of arrangement, this type of agreement is fundamental to our cooperation, and I would argue it is fundamental to cybersecurity. It's incredibly important that people understand that the agreement and the access to data comes with important safeguards, and in our system, that means a warrant issued by an independent judge based on a finding of probable cause and based on a very particular showing by prosecutors in a criminal investigation. So it's incredibly important that we be clear about the safeguards and the framework that we operate under.
So we've talked a little bit about the legal framework and then how you use that framework to get information to do things like hack the hackers, steal back keys so people can get access to information, return money to victims. But I know you just spoke and made a major announcement in London at Chatham House, I think yesterday. And
ironically, no Chatham House rules at Chatham House.
Yes. Did get a lot of press despite the Chatham House rule. And you talked there about using a lot of tools in this space that aren't cyber-enabled, using the information to use other types of tools. Could you tell us a little bit about that framework and how it relates to cybersecurity?
Sure, and this forum is a perfect place to discuss this, because what I talked about in London is something we are all confronting, which is a era of great power competition, which of course describes a post-Cold War reality, but it also describes an era where autocratic governments are acquiring, using, and abusing disruptive technologies. And by that I mean technologies that are accelerating critical advances that give a nation state who's using them a military and national security edge. And what we're seeing is autocratic governments trying to acquire these technologies and accelerate their development of them by any means necessary, licit and illicit. And so what I announced was a task force-led strike force called the Disruptive Technology strike force, led by the Justice Department and our Commerce Department, to pool our expertise and go after those who are trying to acquire and abuse this technology in violation of our export control regimes. And I think it's critically important that we are using these tools, that we are doing so in collaboration, both in the United States and with our international partners, because these technologies are being used by autocratic governments to project power at home and abroad, certainly to make these national security advances, but also to repress dissent and engage in transnational repression around the world, and we're seeing it far too often.
And following up, you talk about autocratic regimes, but I want to talk about one in particular when it comes to technology and restrictions on technology, and that's China. And there's been a lot of discussion here about what does it mean to shape behavior or use tools like export control when the goal is not decoupling but shaping behavior? And also for our German colleagues in particular, but EU, how is this approach being done multilaterally versus unilaterally? You talked about your own personal non-use of TikTok at the conference. For some reason, that got a lot of news. Who knows? But tell us a little bit about how this approach applies to China and what's the perspective on the U.S. on working with colleagues across the Atlantic.
It is vitally important. There's not a single thing that we do, certainly in the cyber realm and in the types of issues that I just described when it comes to export controls, sanctions, sanctions evasion, enforcement. All of this takes critical work with our partners. Every single notable cyber disruption, whether it's ransomware networks that we've taken down, whether it's disruption of a GRU botnet, as we did with the Operation Cyclops Blink last year, all of these things, the Hydra darknet marketplace that we took down, thank you very much with the help of our German colleagues, everything we are doing in this space has an international aspect. We cannot operate in a single silo. None of us can do any of this alone. So international cooperation is a critical piece of everything we do. You know, we say in the United States, in typical fashion, using a sports metaphor, that cyber is a team sport. Well, sometimes the best athlete may be one of our foreign partners. And our goal has got to be to use whatever the best tool is to disrupt the attack, to prevent the harm from happening, and to put whatever the best athlete can be on the field, and sometimes that will be our foreign partner. And as teammates, we need to enable our partners just as we would hope they would enable us. So the international cooperation is vital, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
You talked about international cooperation. Another theme of the conference has been cooperation with the private sector and the approach where sometimes the private sector is viewed as the villain here and is subject to regulatory and other actions, saying you need to be more secure and it's your fault. And then others have talked about them as a victim and said, come in and we're here to help and to use your team, partner with you against the bad guy. What's your message to the private sector?
My message is we are all in this together. And the sooner we all recognize that, we in government and those of us who partner with those in the private sector, the sooner we recognize that, the better off we'll be. I've talked about a number of the steps that we've taken to address malicious cyber actors. The critical element to every single one of these is also victim reporting. Take the Hive takedown just a few weeks ago. It was critically important to have victim reporting there to enable us to lie in wait, quite frankly. I described it as a 21st century cyber stakeout through incredibly good work by the FBI and our partners. We literally were sitting inside the network and swiping decryptor keys and passing them on to the victims before they could feel the effect of the ransomware attack. So that was vital. We did that for months. But as good as it was and as important as the impact that we had, which was to prevent over $130 million in ransomware payments, it was the result of only 20% of the victims reporting. Imagine the impact we could have had if we had had a much higher number. So my message is we're in this together. The victim reporting is critically important. It certainly helps law enforcement, but I would argue it also is good for business. It is good for the bottom line because it can prevent you, it can certainly lessen your loss, as Colonial found, but it also can prevent you from being the victim and also help you prevent the next victim.
Let me open it up to questions from the audience. In the role in the United States at the Justice Department, they enforce behavior to prevent age discrimination. So unlike our esteemed Prime Minister colleague, any age is welcome to ask a question.
Although I was happy to hear I qualify as young.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Jennifer Cassidy. I'm with the University of Oxford. Alongside increased information sharing with your partners within the judicial and law framework, would you agree that one of the greatest challenges, and something I think about regularly of our time, is the speed and acceleration of the new disruptive technologies versus the length of time that nation states and regional blocs have the ability to legislate for these new disruptive technologies, and how to balance that? So I'd just be wondering your thoughts on that. And thank you very much.
Thank you for the really insightful question. I think you've hit upon a huge challenge. The norms and the frameworks that we are all struggling to build as we are flying the airplane, of also trying to ensure that we're developing these technologies to be put to greater good use. Everything from semiconductor chips to quantum computing to AI. But I think what is very much at the forefront, even as we try and run both races simultaneously, we have to recognize that China, for instance, is doing that as well, but from a standpoint where they are trying to mold the use and the norms around these technologies that privileges their view of the world, that privileges their values. Those values are completely antithetical to our own. Those values are about authoritarianism. Ours are about democracy and alliances, which this conference so wonderfully showcases.
And just to follow up on that, because it's where you started your remarks today, 'cause the question was really, what do you do when disruptive technology speeds past the rate at which laws change? And you're known for being action-oriented. How do you use tools in that framework in innovative ways with partners?
Well, we've got to be putting them to use, developing them in concert, developing the norms around them in concert, but always mindful of our shared values, and doing so within a rule of law framework. Because if we lose that, I think we have lost our ballast, and we can't be dissuaded from that.
And final question.
Thank you so much. Alexander Martin from The Record again. I'm sorry to everyone for having to put up with the journalist grabbing the microphone. The Department of Justice has had a couple of quite notable activities against ransomware actors over the past few weeks and months. Which of these do you think is going to be the most successful? The sanctions against the TrickBot group, or the kind of hacking the hackers, as it was, against Hive? And which should we expect more of going forward?
All of the above.
That's a great note to end on. So please join me in thanking Lisa Monaco, Deputy Attorney General, for joining us today.
Thanks very much.